Okay, we have what appears to be today short readings, but not short meanings of what the readings have to say. There's a lot going on in these little readings. So let's first talk about this book of Sirach. All right. Now, Sirach, the book of Sirach comes to us under a variety of names. It comes to us under Ecclesiasticus. It comes to us under the instruction of Ben Sirach, or the book of instruction, or wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach. So there's a lot of different titles as to where this book comes to us from. Now, well, at first glance of this happens to be one of my favorite books of the Bible. At first glance, the reading would make us think that it's just a collection of sayings with no particular order. But underlying this, there's a pretty structured literary plan to this writing. So each of the parts begins with an introduction to some doctrine, some wisdom theology in a certain style, reflections on the wisdom literature. So thanks to the information that's given to us in this, the book of Sirach, which is quite long, has a large number of wisdom sayings, and they come from a variety of sources. So it's not just a motley collection of Post-it notes that somebody decided to put together as a book of saying. You see, it's one of those works in which Holy Scripture really indicates to us with tremendously clear cues how deeply related the knowledge that's brought onto us by faith and the knowledge that's brought onto us by reason interact. And you've heard me say this before, faith and reason can never be separated. That's Catholic Church teaching, because what we cannot understand through reasoning, we believe by faith. That's very, very important, because during the Renaissance period, or the Middle Ages, or what they called the Age of Enlightenment, they separated that. And they said, if you can't believe it through reason or through science, or making actual hands-on sense out of it, well, it doesn't happen. And the church says, no, you can't separate these two, because what we don't understand, what we can't clarify for ourselves by reasoning, we believe by faith. You see, so again, this book of Sirach becomes a really powerful book. Although it's not quoted formally, it really is a common thread through a lot of the New Testament passages. Our words of Jesus that's reported in the Gospels, the letters of St. Paul and the letters of St. James, for example, have this common thread of Sirach. We take a look at Matthew, verse 11, 28 to 29. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. All of this is coming out of this book. So it's really a very powerful book, and I encourage you to read it on your own, or certain sections of it on your own, because it is a long book, but it is rich with wisdom literature. And as I said, it is one of my favorites. And when we think of how did they use wisdom literature? Well, just think of the word wisdom. They use the wisdom literature to teach. It's that simple. This is how they teach, and this is how they taught, and how they pass this teaching on to the youth. Because back in the day, keep in mind, we didn't have a lot of writers, and so the faith was passed on, the lessons were passed on through what we call oral tradition. The oral tradition is what we say and pass on in the various settings. One of the settings I could picture, to be quite frank with you, what I can picture, one of the settings would be sitting around the campfire at night, since they don't have computer games or iPads or whatever to play with. They're sitting around the fire at night talking. And what are they talking about? Well, they're teaching the young. And this is where the wisdom literature comes from, and where it really takes hold, because they're passing on the faith. They're passing on what they believe and how they worship. They're passing this on to the family and the community. That's how it's done. And we call that wisdom literature. All right. And so that's where Sirach comes in, under the wisdom literature. So let's take a look here. I'll read the first one, and then we'll work our way through it. When a sieve is shaken, the husks appear. So do people's faults when they speak. Right? And that's almost, you can almost see what he's saying here. Basically a sieve, and they're still used in Palestine, the sieve, all right? They take the corn that's been threshed for the first time and they place it in a sieve and they sift it. And what stays behind are all of the things that attached itself to the corn, all right? The dust and the dirt, the animal dung, whatever it is, that stays behind, you see? So anything that's been beaten into the straw remains behind, while the grain, the best of it, passes through the sieve. So the point of the comparison is that in the case of the type of man, okay, type of us, okay, under consideration, the bad qualities remain in him, just as the refuse remains behind in the sieve, while the good that is in him passes away. Okay. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the Julius Caesar, I think it's Brutus that gives a eulogy, and he says, "The evil men do lives after them. The good is often tiered with their bones. So let it be with Caesar." You see. So again, when this shiv is shaken, again, everything that goes through that mesh, all right, comes through as clear and clean. You see, so the meal that they would use would come through, and the chunks of undesirable material would be left behind. You see, so it's important to realize how the Greek looks at this. So the Greek noun here actually means dung, okay? But the form of the word that's used in here means the rubbish, the bad stuff. So if you took a current translation of this, it would say, when you shake a sieve, the rubbish remains, all right? So the Greek takes it a little deeper. The Greek is focusing on our thoughts. So the Greek word for thoughts is better translated as talk, you see, or speech, you see. So what he's really saying here is, when a sieve is shaken, the refuse appears. So do your faults. All of your faults are exposed, you see. So just when you shake a sieve, as the trash appears, so the person's faults then are going to become clear when he talks. When he talks, and he's going to link this to the heart, and he's going to link this to, again, how we really feel deep down inside. Okay. Any questions on that at all? Okay, who wants to read 5 for us, and then we'll talk about 5. Dan, looks like you drew the short straw. Okay.
Got it. The furnace tests the potter's vessels. The test of a person is in conversation.
You can see why I really like Sirach. I mean, he's right to the point. He's right to the point with the people, so you're not going to get a long-winded, you ask the guy what time it is and he builds you a clock. He's going to give you very, very short, sentences, so again, in this particular verse, the potter knows the use of each vessel, what it's meant for, you see. So he knows how to properly prepare it, the proper temperatures of the kiln so that its use is maximized. So the Lord also knows the body. He also knows the body. He knows how far it will persist in goodness. And the Lord also knows when it begins doing evil. So as the potter would know the weakest parts of the vessel he's made, or what the vessel is used for, well, so the Lord knows our weakest parts as well, you see. So again, he's tying the two together, you see. So the kiln is the furnace or the oven, all right, where the newly made pots of wet clay are put in to be fired or baked. So if there are any flaws in that, they're going to crack while it's being fired. Okay. Now, if you have a culture where a kiln is unknown, the statement would be simple. When you take a pot made of wet clay in the fire to harden it, you can see where its flaws are. All right. So he's talking about the test of a man, the test of mankind, the test of us. All right. And he says, so the test of a man is in his reasoning. Now, here we have to look at the translation of the word reasoning. What are we talking about? The test of the man. And again, all of you know when I say man, I mean man and woman. Okay. So there's no confusion there. The test of a man is in his talk or his speech. That's what the word reasoning means there. All right. So it's in his talk or speech. So in this context, that's what that's what it means, or conversation, you see. So although the translation that you use could be a little bit awkward, we turn toward the more I'm going to say convenient, but that's not the word I really want to use. A better translation. All right. Basically, what we're saying here is the way you talk, or the way we talk, shows our character. As sure as any flaws in a clay pot will appear when the pot is fired or heated or baked, however you want to put it, you see. So it shows the character. So as sure as any flaws in this clay pot appear when someone fires it, okay, in the kiln, well, you're going to be able to see it because you can't hide that. You can't hide that. And so I'm sure all of you have seen this. I've seen it myself. You're out in the general public or whatever, and you overhear some conversation. I had this happen the other day. I went over to the gym. I had an hour to take for myself, and I thought, I'm just going to go and just exercise a little bit. And here, some of these people who looked like they were really, hey, these are really upstanding looking people. They really look super. I just happened to overhear a conversation, which I can't repeat in this Bible study because the language was so colorful and the descriptions of what they were talking about were like, wow, I can't believe I'm actually hearing this. That's what we're talking, so you see on the one side, you see a picture of one thing, but then what Sirach is saying is, wait a minute, that is going to speak. That's going to have conversation, and watch what comes out of the conversation, because that will tell you how the heart is formed. That's where he's going with this. Okay, so let's take a look at 6 here. Who wants to read 6? Everyone looks awake now, so I think we're cool. Frank, go ahead.
The fruit of a tree shows the care it has had. So speech discloses the bent of a person's heart.
Okay, so what are we saying here? Who wants to jump in and join in on this? It's a common thread that we're talking about here. Okay, nobody.
Go.
No, go ahead.
When we talk about the fruit of the tree shows the care it's had, means the upbringing, well, the things that they learned as a child or as their parents taught them, and what they've collected, so that their morals and their character are developed. And so when they speak, what they have in their heart and what they've learned comes out.
Great. Dan, did you have something else you wanted to add too?
No, I was just going to say, I was kind of the same line, but Deacon Chip said it better than I did. So let it go with that.
Yeah, basically the care of it, you see. So again, the utterances, the what comes out of the thought of the heart of a man is really key, because just as the yield of a tree depends upon how we tended it, well, what we say and how we communicate and how we speak depends on the state of our hearts, okay? And what does that mean? Well, it means in the way we tend it ourselves, right? And now it's referring specifically to a spiritual sense. How are we tending to ourselves spiritually? Because that's what feeds and nourishes us. So we have to be very concerned about our spiritual life, our spiritual roots. And that's whether you're a deacon or a deacon candidate, or no matter who you are. He's not talking to deacons or deacon candidates here. He's talking to everybody. And what he's saying is you have to have some spiritual roots there, because it's the spiritual roots that are going to help to care for you, to nurture you, you see. So basically, the expression of our thoughts discloses the cultivation of our minds and how were our minds cultivated. How were our consciences formed? Yes, Becky.
I think a lesson I'm learning from just these 3 lines already is to think before I speak, because what comes out of my mouth tells people a lot about who I am and what I believe. So, you know, letting my mouth not go until my brain figures it out is a good idea.
And we've all done it. We've all done it where, as we've said something, we're trying to grab the words back because we know it's not coming out right. There's something this is not gonna be good. You know, we've all done that, and yes, it's it's good to stop for a minute and take a breath, and before we respond to whatever it is, especially in serious conversation or a serious debate, that's where we get into trouble, when anger kind of slips its way in. And so it's good for us to step back, you see, because again, the expression of how we express our thoughts tells people how we have cultivated our mind, or how we have cultivated our conscience, okay, how we have formed a good conscience. So expression of a thought has the same Greek word in it too. So the translation of the Hebrew and the Greek and whatnot is basically the same here, you see. So it's better translated as talk or speech. And this cultivation, again, expresses very clearly that it's how we are formed. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about cultivation. How are we formed? Okay. And so that's where he's going with this. And so who wants to read 7?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Praise no one before he speaks, for it is then that people are tested.
Okay. What do we see here?
I think again, just the whole theme of we can look at something. What came to me is looks can be deceiving, right? Just like what you said when you were at the gym, or you know, I've had that experience too, where you walk out of mass and you hear someone swearing, and you know, I just kind of you shake your head. But I think it is like we can think certain things based on what we see or what we think we see, but it's how we act through our speech, especially.
That's right. And so what he's saying here, praise no one before he speaks. In other words, let the words come out first, right? Don't praise anyone until you hear that person complete the thought, right? Because that's the test of the person. So literally it's saying before anyone speaks, don't praise them. Wait and see what they have to say first, okay? Because it's through the person's words that we're going to learn about his character, not just the words he uses, but his character, you see. And so it follows that we shouldn't praise anyone until we've had an opportunity to learn that the person's character, a little bit about his background, all right, before we listen to his conversation. That's the key. So he's throwing out that warning. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that there were a lot of false prophets at the time. There were a lot of people who would lead others astray with their thought process or their theology. And so he's saying, let's put the brakes on, everyone. Let's step back for a moment. Let's take in what they're saying before we follow it. But secondly, more importantly, as Becky said, let's stop and think before we jump the gun. Because what's going to come out in our speech is going to be what is laying on our hearts. And so that's how you can develop a person's character. Okay. That's how you can develop a person's character. They said a small reading, a short reading, but a lot of wealth of information in that reading. And again, what I like about common sense, a lot of common sense, and hard to do. Because sometimes we do get into conversations where we want to jump right in there, okay? And we got to stop for a minute and think, you know, calm ourselves down, you know, put our thoughts in line before we respond. Because if we don't, we can take a situation and accelerate it into something that it doesn't really have to be. And that's what he's doing here. Any other questions and comments on this? I thoroughly encourage you to continue reading this particular book. As I said, I find it a fun book to read because it gives me insights as how the people were taught, throughout the wisdom literature. Okay, if there are no other comments, let's take a look at our buddy St. Paul here in his letter to the Corinthians. And let's see, who wants to read verse 54? Read the first one. Amy, do you want to do that?
Sure. And when this which is corruptible clothes itself with incorruptibility, and this which is mortal clothes itself with immortality, then the word that is written shall come about. Death is swallowed up in victory.
Okay. Where he says, and when this which, okay, they left, in this translation, they left out the word so, and so. So this is part of a teaching, okay? And so when, so in your mind, insert that word so there. So what do we see here? Okay, he's talking about here in the future, the glorious world, okay, when everything will have been accomplished. That's what then shall be brought to pass, all right? Or written shall come about. In other words, everything will be fully accomplished. The words then will receive the entire fulfillment, okay? The teachings of Christ will receive their entire fulfillment. Right? Or the event will meet all that is implied in these words. So again, what he's talking about, that when they don't understand some of the teaching, what he's talking about, he's letting them know that this will all come together, right? The word that is written, all right? The word that is written. Well, what is written, or the record that they're making at that particular time, all right? Again, what he's doing here is he's reaching back and quoting from Isaiah. And the fact that he quotes them, all right, and the connection that he puts together prove that they had reference to the times of the gospel, that Isaiah's words had reference to the times of the gospel. And also, what he's talking about here is the resurrection of the dead. Now, he doesn't quote totally from or completely from the Hebrew or the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew, okay? But what he's doing is he's trying to put meat on the bone, give substance to the passage. And he uses this term, death, okay? Now, undoubtedly here, he's using death in the proper sense. Another death as it affects the living and consigning us to the grave. All right. There's two deaths. There's the death that we, again, as human beings, experience because of original sin, but there's a spiritual death. There's a spiritual death, which is really key here. You never want to undergo the spiritual death at all. All right. So he's referring again to death in the proper sense. And then he mentions this term swallow up, right? It means to absorb, to overwhelm, to be so overwhelming as to drown someone, and then to destroy or remove that person. So the idea can be taken from, he could be explaining to them being caught up in a whirlpool. The water was always looked upon as death in the gospel. And so it would be something that sucks in or absorbs all that comes near it, you see. And in the sense, what he's saying here is that he will abolish death. In other words, God will cause it to cease from all of its ravages, all of its triumphs, you see. And so again, he says, death is swallowed up in victory. Okay, well, all right. So victory then, to complete the complete victory, right? The Hebrew often takes this word and means splendor and purity and trust, eternity. You see, so he's elevating this. So the Hebrew word can also stretch out and mean that right to the end, to the completeness of perfection, or into victory with triumph. You see, we don't focus so much on the specific meaning because everything, all the meanings of the different translations come to the same thing. It's the idea. And the idea that he's focusing on is that the dominion over death will be entirely destroyed or brought to an end. That's what he's talking to them about. So it doesn't matter whether you take the Hebrew translation of the word or you take the Greek translation of the word. No, it's the thought, the concept. The dominion of death, as we understand it, right, will be entirely destroyed or brought to an end. So his writing to the Corinthians here is a writing of hope, as most of his writings are a writing of hope. A little to unpack there, but a writing of hope. And I think I mentioned in one of our previous Bible studies that there is a book by N.T. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, called What Paul Really Said. And I think it's a good book to take a look at. And then that could lead you to other books by that author. But it's Paul writes extensively. And I guess we can say we're grateful that we didn't have computers in those days with Word, because Paul would have volumes and volumes and volumes of readings, you see. So understanding what he's actually referring to and what he's saying here is very, very important. And that's what he's talking here. And so 55, this bumper sticker saying here, who wants to read 55? Go ahead, Dan.
Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? Okay.
Now this we've heard this a lot. We've heard this expression a lot. You know, it's a triumphant exclamation, right? And it's a triumphant view, which actually explodes on the soul, as if it's thinking about the fact that the work of the second Adam has repaired the ruins of the first Adam. The work of the second Adam, Jesus, has repaired the ruins of the first Adam. And what is that? Man has been redeemed. Jesus came and paid the debt that we could not afford to pay. That's what he's talking about here, you see. The body will be raised. Not another human being should die, and the work of death will be ended. That's it. But it's even more, because death is not only at an end, it's not only just going to cease, but all of the evils of death will now be repaired. As I just said, the work of the second Adam is going to repair the ruins of the first Adam. And so what does that mean? Well, if that's the case, all glory and honor are going to encompass the entire body of man. All right, and he's telling them it's going to encompass it so much that it will encompass it as something you have never, ever known before. So what is he saying there? It's going to encompass it right back to the first days of creation, before sin entered the world. When Adam and Eve stood in the garden, radiant in their glory, radiant in the creation that God had made. That's what he's saying. We're going to go all the way back here. So there is no, you can do all the research you want on this. You're not going to find one commentary, and trust me, because I read a lot of commentaries, that can add to the beauty and force of the language in this one little verse. So the best way to think about this, the best way to view this, is to sit down and think about death. What has death been? What's it done? What has it meant in our lives? Millions and millions of people have died. Right? The earth is, there are cemeteries all over the place. But think of our own death, the certainty that we must die. And we think of our parents and our brothers and our sisters, our relatives, our friends, that all must die. But then to enter the truth in its fullness, that we will rise. And that the time will come when death will come to an end and there will be absolutely none. And so when you think of that, that all of the sorrow and all of the pain that's brought about to us through death, it's going to be gone, non-existent. Okay. How can you not have words of triumph and praise and excitement and go through your hymnal and read all the hymns of praise that are in your hymnal, right? How can you not? Because when you have a comparison there, you have a comparison of what death brings to us now. And then you have a comparison as to what if that didn't exist? What if it was totally gone now? What if we stood in the garden like Adam and Eve before the sin? That's the meditative thought with that. Because death comes into the world because of original sin. That's one of the byproducts. That's how it entered. Before that, it wasn't there and wasn't intended to be there. So then we have, where is thy sting? Now here, the word actually translates to what we would think, kind of a prick, a needle point, stung by a bee, stung by a scorpion, okay, a bad sting. So here, it really means that it's a venomous thing. Death is a weapon, you see. And if death came about to destroy life, well, he's going back to the thought process to compare it to the sting of a bee or a scorpion in the day to destroy life. You see, so that's where he's coming from, or the sting of a serpent, if you wanted to say, or other reptile, that it's being destructive and painful. But his language flips it because it becomes language of exaltation, as if this was taken away or destroyed. That's why it's the question, death, where's your sting? What happened? What happened to you? Seems to be gone. Where's your victory? I don't see a victory. You didn't win. You didn't win over the will of God. And where's your sting? You didn't even get that in. You didn't even get the little prick in, okay? Or the little pinpoint or needle point, or however you want to describe it. You didn't even get that in. Right? So a strong teaching again. And the grave, well, like people understand what he's referring to when he talks about the grave, because back in the day, there were a lot of words for it. Hades was one. But what he's talking about is the place of the dead. Where did the dead go? You see, and the word properly explains a place of darkness. It's a place of darkness. Right? And so the world is very well aware of how death comes into the world, but doesn't view it as a place of light and excitement. According to the Hebrews, they use the word Hades, or you've heard the word Sheol. This was kind of like a below the earth holding tank, a receptacle of some sort, you see, where the souls of the dead existed. And that was the thought process before Christ came and went to the netherworld. So heaven was empty. This came up in one of my classes the other night when we were talking that until Jesus died, heaven was empty. There was nobody there. And he says, point blank, the only one who has seen the Father is the one who came down from the Father. There's no one there. And no one can be there until he goes to, after he dies, he goes to the netherworld and he unlocks those gates. So heaven is empty, you see. So in their mind, they understand this Sheol or this Hades. And that's usually explained, by the way, in the beginning of your Bible, depending on the version that you have. You'll see this explanation of Sheol. This was this vast receptacle, as I called it, where the souls of the dead kind of hung out. And it was viewed to be a very, very dark, deep, still place. Not a fun place, an awful place. Okay, just, the descent to it, to get there, was through the grave. That's how you got there. So you had to die, all right? And when you were put in the grave, that's where you went. And all of the spirits of the dead were supposed to be assembled there. All right? Now, when you look at it, when you look at the front of your Bible, if it talks about Sheol, you'll see there are levels. The righteous occupied the upper levels, and then depending on how wicked you were, you kind of worked your way down. And I believe the Bible will reference seven layers, you see, with Satan being at the very bottom. All right? So but it definitely refers to the dead. And it means the grave, or the place where the people will no longer have a victory. They're just in this holding tank. So when he refers to where's thy victory? Well, since the dead are to arise, since all of the graves are to give up all that lives in them, or dwells in them, and no man will live after that, or not rather die after that, where's the victory? There is none. Death has lost, you see. Is the victory taken away? Is it ruined somehow? The power of death and the grave, where do they stand? Well, they're gone, you see. Why? Because Christ is triumphant over all of it. That's the teaching. And understand Paul's audience. He's teaching to Gentiles. He's teaching to Gentiles. So he's teaching to people that don't understand. They don't have the law of Moses. They don't understand this. So he has to teach them in very, very plain and simple language that what Christ did for us, he did for everyone. And he's triumphant over all of this, you see. So again, he wants these words to be very, very simple words, but very powerful words. And so what he's doing is he's breaking out in his heart. You got to picture Paul. Paul is overflowing with the good news. He's jumping out of his sandals with the good news. I mean, he's so excited with the good news. Okay? So what has he got here? He has the glorious truth. This is what's in his heart, in his mind. He has the glorious truth that he wants to present to the people. And he's so excited to present it to them, you see. He probably didn't expect this to become a bumper sticker in this day and age. Death, where is your victory? But he spoke as someone who would naturally speak, who is familiar with the language of the scriptures, you see. And he's using it to express the sense that he intended without making a literal quotation, right? He's basically stating point blank, and he's focusing directly on what Jesus Christ did for us. And so he has this message of hope and the message of salvation, because that's what he came for. And letting them know that this is going to happen no more. So don't sweat it. So he's building the faith from the roots up, is what he's doing. So the roots, actually, that's it. It links to our first reading, because that's what he's doing. Is he's nurturing, he's cultivating, right, the souls of the people, so they can understand again the salvific work of Jesus, the first Adam, or the new Adam. Right. So the comparison there is always, whenever you think of Jesus in this light, all right, you always think of the new Adam has come to repair or to restore what the first Adam destroyed. Right. That's what they would understand. Any other questions on that or comments? Okay. Let's take a look at 56. Who wants to read 56 for us? Okay. Oh, there you go. Okay, Janice, thanks.
The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law.
Okay. Any insights to that before we begin to unpack that one? Okay, let's take a look at this then. The sting of death. All right. Well, he's letting them know that death does bear a definite sting. All right. And by doing so, death gets its purpose. All right. What is it meant to do? It's meant to take away. Death takes away. Right. It takes away the life. But there would be no death without sin. That's what I said a few moments ago. If original sin hadn't been into the world, we wouldn't be having conversations about death, because that's how it came into the world, you see. So here, Paul is really personifying death as if it was a living being. He's making a reality to the people, see. and that sin itself, by making use of sin, what you're going to do is inflict death. Right? And the sting he's referring to, this is the instrument that brings this about, which inflicts what he would be referring to as mortal agony. Okay. You're mortally wounded. So his idea here is very clear. Right? Sin is the cause of death. That's it. Sin is the cause of death. Sin introduced it. Sin makes it certain. And sin brings into the person a tremendous amount of pain, distress, agony, horror, any of those words. That's what comes with it, you see. And again, his teaching is, as we're saying all along through this, had there been no sin, no one would have died. Death would be non-existent. There would be no horror, no alarm. The innocent would not be afraid to die. Why would the innocent be afraid to die? You see? So he does say the fact is that men do die. And what does that mean? Well, it's proof that men are sinners. And the fact that they feel fear or alarm is proof that they themselves feel guilty. They feel guilty. And that they are afraid to go into the presence of God. That fear exists today. You have people who are afraid of death because they are afraid to face God. So he says, if we take this away, if sin is removed, all of this is removed as well. And there's no fear with facing God. So he talks about the power of sin. Well, change that word for a moment to the word strength, the strength of sin. Okay, the strength of sin. What is it? Well, now, if you want to bring the word power back, it's power over the mind. Sin takes over the thought process, takes over the mind. And it has a terrific and really a dreadful energy to it. That's where the power comes in. But it's extremely strong. And it especially has this strength to produce fear and alarm at the hour of death. And I've seen this. I've seen people on their deathbed, petrified, afraid. And what do? Well, we immediately call for the priest to come in to anoint the person. We pray with the person. And I've seen the work of that. I'll get a real life example. One Thanksgiving Day a few years ago, Nancy and I, we had gone to Mass, but we were going down to Gettysburg, I think it was, for Thanksgiving weekend. We had gotten some sort of a deal down there, and we figured, okay, we'll go down there. So on our way down, I get a phone call that this person I had been visiting for quite a few months, I knew she was dying. She was in hospice care and over in Winburg at the Palliative Care Center. But I got a text message from her mother that she had moments left and she was panicking. So Nancy and I, we were close by, so we just turned the car around and I drove over there, and she was. Now, this was a woman, she had been anointed. I mean, all the prayers having been said, but she was in a panic. So I went to the desk, and at that time, the priest that was covering was Father Adrian, delightful man, and he came right over. And after he anointed her, the look of peace and comfort that came over her face was really beautiful to see. And she passed a few moments later. But my point here is that sin, and I'm not saying this woman had sinned, I'm not saying she was sinful, I'm not saying that at all. But because that's in our life and it has such strength or such power in the world, that it causes us to fear facing the Lord. And that's what Paul is talking about here. It causes great fear in facing the Lord. Okay. So the power of sin is the law. Right? With this idea, and Paul actually goes deeper into this in his letter to the Romans, He probably made the statement here in order to meet the Jews and to show that the law of God had no power to take away the fear of death. That's his comparison. Just because you have the law, well, it doesn't mean it's going to take that fear away, you see. And why? So what is needed? What's needed then is the gospel. The gospel, the good news. That alone could do it. The good news of Jesus Christ. That alone could do it. Because the Jews, in the Jews' mind, they maintained in their thought process that it was the law. It's through the law that man might be justified and saved, because if they were obedient to the law. And Paul is saying, no, that's not the case. He's saying, he makes an unusual comment here, or an unusual understanding here, that it's the law that gives its chief energy to sin. Why? Because the law is detailing all of these sins. It's like defining all of these different sins, you see. But the law doesn't tell you where the salvation comes from. Therefore, there was need for the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Why? Because it's Jesus Christ who could remove the cause of the fear and horror, right, that is caused by sin. And it would leave the redeemed person to die in peace. So his focus is not to dwell on the law. And if you move to the left, you're wrong and you do this. And if you move to the right, you're wrong if you do that. No, what is he talking about? He's talking about the good news of Jesus Christ. And that if the good news of Jesus Christ was on your heart, okay, the pardoned person would die in peace. A strong message to them. A very, very strong message. Because again, keep in mind, the Gentiles don't know from the law. They don't have it. They don't have the law like the Jews have, the 5 books of Moses. So he's telling them, no, that Jesus came to fix all that, to redeem us. So 57, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. So on the one side of his teaching, he's dwelling on death and what death does and all the horror and the sorrow and everything that it brings in. But then he starts to reach his ending, to close his theme by saying it's thanks to God who gave us victory. How? Through Jesus Christ. So for that, to explain that, you really have to look at the book of Romans. You have the letter to the Romans, rather, chapter 7, verse 25. And he says, I thank God. In other words, I thank God for bringing this deliverance to which I couldn't do. I'm incompetent to do it, you know. So he's telling the people there is a way of rescue. And I trace it all together in what? In the mercy of Jesus Christ. So what he's saying is what your conscience couldn't do, what the law couldn't do, what our own human strength couldn't do, well, the plan of the gospel can do it. Let me say that again, because that's really important. This is the teaching, you know, what our own conscience could not do, what the law can't do for us, what our own human strength couldn't do, is accomplished by the plan of the gospel. He uses the word plan. What does that mean? Well, God had a plan. There was a purpose for the gospel, a purpose for Jesus coming. And what was the purpose? Complete deliverance. Complete deliverance, complete redemption. Not a piece of it, complete redemption. And for everybody, not just a select few. See, so that's the point, or the focus in which all his reasoning gathered. You know, he shows that the law is insufficient for the deliverance. But now he wants to make clear the language of Christian thankfulness that's affected by what? Affected by the gospel. What does the word gospel mean? Good news. Always define that for your people. We hear gospel and right away we think of the Bible, whether you have one that weighs 5 pounds or 500 pounds, we think of the big, the holy book, the Bible. It's the good news. It's the good news. Whose good news is it? It's the good news of Jesus Christ. That's what it is. That's your definition. And I think that brings more weight to it, you see. So again, the superiority of the gospel to the law. The gospel is above the law. Why? Well, as you read the gospel, the good news, what do you see Jesus doing? He's correcting where the people have gone astray from the law, where the Pharisees have put in place a law that was not intended by God. And Jesus says that many times. You have heard it said such and such, but I say to you, he's fixing it. He's telling the people, but you took the law, right? And you took the 10 commandments and you made, I think it's like 653 laws or something like that out of the 10 commandments. And you've put such a heavy burden on the people, and that's not what God originally intended. So it's the superiority of the gospel over the law that overcomes the evils that we are challenged with. And so it's through that we can realize our triumph or our victory. Okay. And he says, who gives us the victory? Us is us, the Christians, us, all Christians. And it's the victory over sin, death, and the grave. And God is the only author of that victory. Why? Well, from the very beginning, God formed the plan. And he executed his plan in the gift of his son. And then he gives it to us personally when we come to die. So God is never out, never a distance from us. He's always there. If anybody distances, if God is of any distance at any point, it's because we have distanced ourselves from God, not that God has distanced ourselves from us. And we see that in Genesis, because he gives, hey, Adam, where are you? He has the plan. He has the plan, and he gives it to him from the beginning. And the only way he can execute it is to give the gift. And it's important to understand that too. He gives us the gift of his son, the gift of his son. And then he gives us the gift when we die. And through our Lord Jesus Christ, it says it all. By his death, and that's what the people need to understand. You have to go back to the time that Paul is writing. He's writing in the 40s and 50s, maybe early 60s, very early 60s, because I think he dies like mid 60s. So that's when he's writing. But again, it's by Christ's death that the power of death was destroyed. And by his triumph and resurrection, over the grave. And that's known then in that time, that Jesus rose from the dead. And if you don't think that's a big deal, well, what would you do today if somebody rose from the dead? I think it's a big deal. Well, it was a big deal then too, you see. So again, by this grace, he enables us to sustain any of the pains of death. Why? Because again, Paul's theme here is he's giving us the hope of a glorious resurrection. That's the teaching. So he's saying to the people, if Christ died and rose, well, so will you. So will you. Powerful teaching. Okay. Let's look at 58. Who wants to read 58 for us? Becky, yes.
Therefore, my beloved brothers, be firm, steadfast, always fully devoted to the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain.
Okay. What are we unpacking here?
I would say that it means if you have faith and good works, that's certainly not in vain. That's what you should be doing, following the law of the Lord.
That's exactly right. He right up front, he says, my beloved brothers, okay, my beloved brothers and sisters, all of us, okay. He's telling them to be firm, telling them to be steadfast, right? Not be swayed, be strong, be confident in the faith. Okay? Your labor is not in vain. Yeah, if you have strong faith, and there's a big debate with this because we get accused of people accuse us of this faith and works situation. That no, we're redeemed by faith alone. Yet James, in the letter, St. James's letter, he says, faith without good works is dead. So what does that mean? Well, no, it doesn't mean that we keep a notebook so that when we die, we say to God, "Oh, let me show you my notebook of all the good things I did." No, what it's telling us is that if we are rooted in faith, our faith moves us to action, or should move us to action, okay? And we are involved in good works, in looking after God's creation and looking after God's people. And so your labor will be rewarded. It's not like you're going to die and never live again. There will be a resurrection, and you're going to be compensated or recompensed, they would have said in the day, for anything that you do for the honor of God. And that's what your faith should do. We've said this before many, many times, and that our gifts of the Holy Spirit are not ours to keep. They're ours to give away. So if you've been given the gift of mercy, it's not for you. It's for the person that you will be merciful to. If you've been given the gift of compassion, that's not for you. It's for the people to whom you will be compassionate. If you are a good teacher or a leader, it's not for you. It's for the people you are teaching and leading. That's the key. That's where the faith generates the good works. God gives us the gifts, gives us the graces. Well, we can't hide them in the ground. All right. You all know that Bible story. Okay. We can't hide them in the ground. We have to go out and multiply them. And how do we multiply them? We multiply them by our work for the Lord. You see? And any work that we do in the name of the Lord is not going to be in vain. Even though it might seem like you're pushing a rock uphill at times, it's not going to be in vain. You see? And so the sentiment of the whole verse is that the hope of the resurrection and the future glory should stimulate us then, all right, to really great works, self-denying works. Why? To honor God. As Becky is saying, it should fan the flame that's in us to go out and do these works of the Lord. You see, so again, there are, and he's correcting the people too, because there are people that are influenced by superficial honor, superficial gratitude, superficial pleasure or wealth. And he's saying, no, that's not really where it is, you see. And that our reward comes from the Lord. And although we might not see it right now, any good work that's done out of faith will come from the Lord. So the chapter really closes with great beauty and a real powerful debate, because this is the prospect rather, that is before us as Christians. We're going to die like other people, but death is a sleep. As a matter of fact, the word used for the Blessed Mother's death is the dormition. She goes to sleep, okay? It's a sleep. It's a calm, gentle, undisturbed sleep. And we are asleep in the expectation of being awakened to a brighter day. And so because we have the assurance that the Savior rose, we should feel confident that we will rise with again. And that's Paul's teaching here, you see. So no, you're going to go through difficult times. You're going to have times where the term I used was pushing a rock uphill. Yes, we have all felt that, probably feel that more than we do gratitude for the things that we do, because the work of the Lord is very difficult to do. And it's very frustrating because not everybody's on the same page. You're out there, preaching, teaching, trying to help, trying to get people involved. And you don't see it happening, and it's frustrating. You see the focus is off. The focus becomes on material things in the world, right? But it doesn't focus on the needs of the people, right? It becomes the focus of the needs of the buildings, the needs of the facilities, so that we have our creature comforts in place. You know, God forbid the church should be 2 degrees off where it should be. You know, you'll hear about it within seconds, all right? But you could have people out there who need food, children who need school supplies. You think of any of it, you know, just think of the mission work that we do, all right? That's where the work of the Lord is. That's where the work, that's not to say God wants us to be sitting in church buildings that are 0 degrees. I don't mean that. But what Paul is saying here is that no, we need to go out into the trenches and we need to see where the good work needs to be done. And there are many people out there, don't have to look too far, that are in desperate need, especially today, in desperate need of aid, especially in desperate need of food, of clothing, of whatever. But not only that, in desperate need, and I love the prayer Bishop Mark usually uses when he says grace. You know, he says the grace, and then he will say, especially bring the food of your word, especially to those who hunger for your word. So here again, this is what Paul is doing. There are people out there who hunger for the word of the Lord. We can't lose sight of that. They hunger for the word of the Lord. That's what Paul is doing. So we all have to become mini St. Paul's in our life and go out and touch the people who hunger for the word of the Lord. And that means to live it, and that means to preach it. And if you are teachers, it means to teach it and explain it to the people or the students in a way that they can understand it. So they don't leave the class saying, I don't know what they were smoking. I don't really get this. I don't understand this, you know. And we get that. I do get people come to me and ask me questions that they just came from class and they're not quite understanding this. Okay. Well, there's something wrong. It means we've got to really take our teaching down to the bare bones and help the people to understand what's going on. It's very important when you're teaching about Paul to get the people to understand he's talking to the Gentiles who don't know the Jewish law. And he is teaching them from scratch. All right. And so it's very important to understand that and to unpack that. Do you have any more questions about this letter to the Corinthians before we take a break for a few minutes? Dan, yeah.
I just wanted to say also, when he's talking about being firm and steadfast, it's kind of referring back to the beginning with the power of sin over us and all. And like you said, the challenges we have that, you know, sometimes it's hard to deal with that in our lives, but we have to always keep Christ there, get that strong faith. So it's kind of like that. He's acknowledging, like you said, the strength of sin before he closes it out without saying sin. You know what I mean? Like more of an encouraging sense. But I thought that was kind of interesting how that all tied that everything together.
Yeah, because again, he's looking at that's why he references the law. It says the law is not the answer at all. The law is not the answer. Okay, the law opens your eyes to sin and what sin is, but that's not the answer. The answer are the teachings of Christ. The answer is in the gospel. That's where the answer is, the good news. In other words, you're not toast. You know, God knows that you stumble and fall, and he's there to help pick you up. And not for this particular reading, but if you took a course on the church fathers, you will see that back in the day, it was thought that if you had sinned, if you had left the church, for example, the church could never accept you back. And that was a great heresy in the early church, that if you left the church for whatever reason, or if you sinned, well, that's it. Sorry, you're done. You see, there was no putting the strength in the sacrament of reconciliation, but that's for a church fathers course. You know, so what Paul is trying to instill in them is that no, they need to focus on the gospel. Now, keep in mind, when Paul is teaching, the gospel is not written yet. He wants them to remember the teachings of Christ. Paul starts writing in the year 45. As a matter of fact, the first writing we have, the first writings of the gospel are Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. We don't have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the year 45. We have Paul's writings. You see, so we don't have the evangelists yet. So they have to go on the oral tradition of what's being taught to them about what Jesus did. That's the key. There's no book. He can't say, oh, by the way, I have a book stand at the back of the synagogue here. and you can get my book for $2, or 2 shekels or whatever, pick it up, it's here. No, it's oral tradition that they are spreading about what Jesus did at that particular time, because the Gospels don't start to come in until around the 60s. Okay, let's start up here. I love this at verse 39. Who wants to read 39? Dan, go ahead.
And he told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit?
Okay, this is kind of comical. Again, another bumper sticker bit of scripture here, but the meaning, the understanding is obvious. I mean, a blind man attempting to work with another blind man, well, both would fall into a ditch if it was in the way. But where is this leading? What is he talking about here? Any idea what he's talking about? He's talking about religious teachers. Religious teachers. If the Pharisees, who themselves were ignorant and blind, lead the multitude of people they are teaching down that same path, both will be destroyed. Both will be destroyed. So again, it's another attack on the Pharisees, the blind leading the blind, as I mentioned before, misinterpretation of the law. So this was another reason for Jesus to point out their mistakes. All right. In other words, ripping out the plants, so to speak, since we're talking about roots and trees and whatnot, ripping up the plants that God hadn't planted. So what the teaching here is to be very, very careful, because we have to save those who have been deceived by false and inaccurate teachings. So it's a very, very strong statement. It's a very strong statement that, again, if you have a religious teacher that is not teaching you the faith properly, you're both going to go down the wrong path. Very simple, you see. Now, the other part of this on this lesson here is we have a gift of free will. So we are not compelled to follow these false teachers. We are free in choosing the leaders. All right? And they are answerable, all right, for giving us the proper teachings. So you have a two-edged sword here. A caution about those who don't know the faith and are giving you false teachings, and our own free will. If it doesn't sound right, maybe there's something wrong with this here. We need to take a look at it. So we don't just go down that primrose path, go down the wrong path. Okay. What's the wrong path? The wrong path is when people accuse others of sinning without knowing the true faith. And I'll throw this example out. I've spoken about this before in Bible study. It has been said to me, people have asked me, am I committing a mortal sin if I don't receive communion on the tongue? That's a false teaching. No, you are not. Absolutely not. You see? So that's a simple false teaching of today, that if we don't go back to pre-Vatican II liturgies, that it is somehow sinful. And I'm not talking out of school here. I get this all the time. I get these questions all the time. That's a false teaching. All right? So we cannot follow those teachings at all. That's not to say that the Tridentine Mass is wrong. No, it's a right in and of itself. All right. It's the extraordinary right, the extraordinary right. All right. That's what that is. But I use that as an example because I get those questions all the time. That's not an accurate teaching. And there are people out there that are concerned that because they don't go to a Tridentine Mass, they haven't really been to Mass. That's wrong. That's wrong. All right. So going back to the Pharisees' time, as I said, the Pharisees had laws for laws. And that's what Jesus was saying is, no. These are not the proper teachings, but also we have free will. And so we choose those we are going to follow. And hopefully we do our homework to make sure that those we are going to follow are firm in the faith and are not going to lead us down the wrong path. Any questions on that? Because that's a hot topic today. Any comments or questions on that? Yes, Dan.
Well, I think that would go back to Sirach too, and the importance of the oral tradition and passing it on. You know, it's always been a big part of our faith is passing it on correctly. You know, even back to Moses and Joshua before they entered, he teach the children. You know, and I just think that it's crucial that we do that in today's age, is pass it on correctly, so you don't get those misconceptions. Because once it starts getting split apart, then you get into what St. Paul's talking about, and all of a sudden now you're getting the wrong idea, and sins having happening, and people are losing sight of the gift of what Jesus gave us with his death and resurrection. So in today's day and age, especially with catechizing, it's so important that we're really teaching the faith correctly. And I'm learning it through my RCIA, where I help teach that. It's, people have so many misconceptions of things, of what they've heard, what they've been told, that it's important that we're doing Bible studies and things like this to make sure we're all getting that same, faith and tradition and scripture and passing it correctly to everyone else.
That's true. In 1975, Pope St. Paul VI, all right, came out with, it's called Evangelii Nuntiandi. You can look it up on the internet if you want. You'll get the Vatican document. But again, a dry document to read, but there's a couple of very important things that it says. It's talking about evangelization. This is 1975. And he says, the church is an evangelizer. However, before it can evangelize, it must evangelize itself. Look that up. That's really powerful. What's that? What is he saying? You need to be teaching the faith properly before you go out and teach the faith. Just what we're talking. That's 1975. You'll find that document. All right. And I think it's a very, very important point. And it's not that I walk around with these documents on my lips, but I do a lot of research, and I've been talking a lot about this new evangelization on different venues, not just a Bible study, but different venues. And so I've done some additional research on the new evangelization to see exactly what this is. This goes back to 1975. Pope Paul VI is saying, wait a second, guys. Yeah, we're an evangelizer, but we got to make sure that we're evangelizing the right things, you see. And Dan is correct. If we lined 12 people up today and we gave person number 1 a saying, by the time it got to person number 12, I don't think it's going to resemble much of what person number 1 heard. And we all know that. The stories change and change and change. That's why oral tradition was so very important. And again, you see a lot of reference to the word elders, all right, in the sacred scripture. Who were the elders? The elders were the ones you went to when you had doubts about a certain thing, because the elders knew the history and they knew the direction and they knew the teachings. So if there was debate or confusion or whatnot, you went to a church elder and you spoke to the elder so that you got the right message. And that's what we're talking about here, so that we are hearing the right message. But if it sounds strange to us, we have an obligation to go and seek out what the teaching is, not just take it on face value. All right, not just take it on face value. We have an obligation to dig deeper, to find someone in the church, no matter who it is, the bishop, the priest, the deacon, whoever we have confidence in, that the person is firmly rooted in the faith, and find out, what do we really believe as Catholic Christians? What do we really believe? That's what he's talking about here. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, and what you said earlier with the blind leading the blind, it's even as I'm a candidate and you're a deacon and the priest, it's our responsibility, as you've taught me before, is we should always continue to read and learn. We're never done learning, because we have to be, all of us, the laity, the clergy, all of us have to be at the top of our game as teachers, whether we label ourselves a teacher or not. We're part of the faith. We're all teachers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your hierarchy in the church, whether it's laity or whatever you're at, but we have to keep learning ourselves to correctly put that knowledge out there to those that are questioning. So
That's a very good point. In that, yes, we all have to keep learning. As a matter of fact, I bring that example of 1975 up because Paul VI was our Vatican II Pope, right? John the 23rd began it. Paul VI moved it forward, okay? Now, prior to Vatican II, the church was the church, and you didn't question anything at all right? So Paul comes out in 1975 with this statement saying, oh yeah, we are evangelizers. However, we need to evangelize ourselves. So what he's saying is we need to dig deep, we need to clean up our act, and we need to properly communicate the faith to the people. That was the whole purpose of Vatican II. When John the 23rd announced the council, okay? Now, I was very young at the time, but I'm sure that that went through the church like shockwaves, all right? That he was going to call a council. And the word he used, and I've said this before, is aggiornamento, all right? And it's a word that means open the windows. He wanted to open the windows of the church to the world, not to change the church to meet the world, no, to open the windows of the church so it wasn't so mysterious, so people understood, you know, or learned about the Catholic faith. It wasn't this deep, dark secret that was hidden behind a lot of smoke, right? So that was his purpose. And so by the time Paul comes forward and gets involved, he makes this very, very powerful statement. Before you go out and evangelize yourself. Make sure you know the faith. And that carries through all the way. Pope Francis has said the same thing. He said, look, stand in front of a mirror and evangelize yourself first before you go out there, you know, with these false teachings. And that's what we're talking, that's what Jesus is talking about here, right? The false teachers. They come out with a statement or whatever, and everybody runs and follows them. See, the backside of that is, though, we have free will, so we can't forget it. And so we are free to choose those who will lead us or who we will follow. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we are not being led to ruin, so to speak. And so if we feel that a teaching is false or it's not clear, we have a responsibility to get the clarification. That's key. And also for those of you who are teachers out there or deacons or deacon candidates who teach and preach, you have a big responsibility to make sure before you teach anything about the faith that you've done your homework. Otherwise, you're going to have them moving on one path that might not be the right one. And so you want to make sure that you've done your homework on it and that you can answer the questions for, you know, for those who have questions about the faith. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Yeah, Melissa.
I was just going to say, and I'm not a religious ed teacher, but I think like when you just said that, it makes me think, because I've had this happen lately, that I need to be a teacher, so to speak, in order to defend my faith. And I think so often us Catholics are blamed for, well, you Catholics this, you that. I just had an interaction recently with someone, and it was regarding IVF, and he couldn't understand. He was not Catholic, his wife was, and he couldn't understand the church's stance. And I said, you know, and I knew a little bit about it just from some other studying, but I said, I'll get some answers for you. And I used some Catholic resources. But I think like that's what I'm finding. And like my little Arise group, like we continue to meet. And this is the conversation we have over and over is we need to know our faith well enough so that we can defend it. And when someone questions us, or we can share it, or if they say, well, why do you know, these common questions of, you know, well, you pray to Mary, you know, you put Mary before Christ, like all those things that we're blamed for. I need to be able to defend that and explain why by right teaching, such as things like this. So I think that's important for all of us.
It is important because we are called to defend the faith every day. We're called to defend the faith. And we do hear these things. Sadly, we hear these things from our Catholic brothers and sisters. When you realize that only a third of the Catholics believe in the real presence, there's a problem here. And anyone that doesn't want to recognize there's a problem here is fooling themselves. To not believe in the real presence is something very extremely serious, you see, but that's out there. And that got somehow or other, it got lost in the catechesis. And that's why it's important that we understand what we believe. Not only that, why do we believe it? That's the key. So we're not just falsely being hit with a magic wand that you have to go out and teach this because this is what I told you to teach. No, we are fortunate today to have the technologies to be able to do research pretty quickly and find actually very, very credible theologians that can help steer us. But not only that, we have theologians in our own diocese that we can call and say, I'm not quite sure. I was just on the phone the other day with Father John Burns because a question came across my desk about canon law. Now, the deacon candidates and the deacons know how about the canon law book because it weighs about 20 pounds and it's here in my library. And I thought, do I really want to go over and pick that up or should I call Father John? So I called Father John, chose to call him. And again, he is our expert on canon law. And I shared with him the question that I had, and he very quickly was able to give me, the proper advice. And so we do have these experts in our diocese, but also we have, through technology, we have the ability to reach out and read more and learn more, and we need to do that. So those who are teaching, for example, I would hope that they would be doing research for their lesson plan. So when they went out and taught, they knew what they were talking about. And there's nothing wrong when somebody asks a question to say, let me get back to you, rather than just give them an answer that floats off the top of your head and you think it's right. Because that's how the faith has gotten, and again, my opinion, that's how the faith has gotten to where it is right now. And that people don't really understand why we do what we do. And that's really very important for us to constantly get that message out. Why do we make the sign of the cross? Why do we reverence the altar? Why do we genuflect at the tabernacle? Why do we do all these little things that other denominations look at us and scratch their head and say, like, what are they doing? What are they doing? So yeah, that's very, very important. So it takes us to this blind leading the blind. There's a danger there for us that if we do not know the faith as we should, we will be the blind person, sadly, leading the blind, because we will be teaching them the wrong things or taking them down the wrong path. Right. Let's take a look at number 40. Who wants to read number 40?
I will. Amy. No disciple is superior to the teacher, but when fully trained, every disciple will be like his teacher.
Okay. Here's a powerful one here. What are we saying here? It should be self-evident. Okay, obviously it's not. Deacon candidates, you're not above your teacher, so let's not go. Let's get that.
That's what I was going to say, but I don't want to go there. No. I'm flying low under the radar right now, but no, I think that it's kind of like at school. I mean, I'll give you an example outside of religion. Is I teach kids at school, like a history teacher, and I had this one student that loved history when I had him in 6th grade, fell in love with history all through college, and I just ran into him. Now he's a history teacher. And I get it's not religion, but again, along with that religious aspect is that we put that faith out there, we educate people, and they're learning and learning and learning from you. And it's not till that point that they, totally grasp, not totally grasp, but totally come into the faith, that at that point they can be an image of their teacher, not exactly above their teacher or whatever, but they become this image of Christ out there also.
Yeah, good point, because the learner, while you're learning, you're not above your teacher. You don't know more than your teacher. Your teacher is the expert, hopefully, okay? Going back to what we just said a little while ago, providing the teacher is prepared and not the blind leading the blind, all right? You're not above your teacher. And again, this was spoken to the people. So to get them to understand that the disciples were not expected to go beyond their teachers, all right, while they're in the learning phase. See, and it goes back to the statement of the blind as well, that if your teachers are blind, well, the followers would be. But it's important for them to understand that if, again, if you understand fully the doctrines of the gospel, you won't be blind leaders, you see. So as you gain more knowledge, yes, you become the teacher. At one point, well, we're always all learners. Let's put it that way. We always are. I mean, even myself for these classes here, I'm always reading and checking and doing my homework so I can have good discussion with all of you. But the key here is, again, that we have to understand that in order to be a good learner, we have to make sure that our teachers are good teachers. All right, that's the key. All right, so it means that everybody should be thoroughly instructed or thoroughly informed. So the Christian basically should be like the master. That's a big statement. But what do we mean by it? Well, if we're going to be like the master, we're going to strive for holiness. We're going to be holy. We're going to be harmless. We're going to be undefiled, as they would put it in the ancient language, okay? We're going to be separate from sinners. In other words, we're going to live a different life. We're going to be living the Christian life to be like the master or like the teacher, you see? So it's up to us to copy that example, you see? And so what we want to do is we want to grow into the likeness of the Redeemer. We want to grow into the likeness of Jesus Christ. And if we don't have that desire, we're not Christian. If we don't have that desire, I don't know what we are, but we're not Christian. And Pope Francis said it very succinctly a few months ago when there were questions about the magisterium, that is the governing arm that teaches us about the faith. And he said that anyone who doesn't adopt the teachings of the magisterium, including Vatican II, they're not Catholic. That's simple. So that's what we're saying here. We need to focus our lives on growing into the likeness of the Redeemer. That's what we're striving to do all the time. And so we are in the position of being the learner. And the more we learn, the stronger we grow. We become the teacher. And the teacher who is firm in the faith, teaching the proper tenets of the faith. And here comes the line that again, everyone should, the kids really love this line, especially. Who wants to read number 41? Go ahead, Melissa.
Read it. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own?
Now, there was a little kid in church that got hysterical when he heard this line because he visualized this. He visualized this guy walking around with this beam in his eye, and he thought that was so funny. He thought that, and it was really cute to see. This happened a couple of years ago, and it was just really cute he took just the visual and found it hysterical. You see, and yeah, Jesus speaks in the language that people would understand. All right. So again, let's pull this apart. What do you have to say about this?
Well, this is something that Father Larry says to me often in confession. And that's what I do, is visualize this, not a splinter, not a tip, but this. And I think just that we're so quick to judge. It's so easy to judge, but we fail to look internally and see our own sin.
Anyone else? I'd like to just add one little bit to what Melissa said. We are quick to judge small things, okay? The small offenses, the nitpicky little stuff, all right? Mm-hmm. And we ignore the larger things in ourselves while we're picking on what somebody else did or didn't do, okay? You know, so even a very small object or a very small incident in someone's life becomes something that we focus on. All right, and we dwell on, and we have to tell the world about this. And meanwhile, we're not standing in front of that mirror. Okay, we need to take a look at our own lives. And this particular sentiment here, was not just a proverb that was familiar to the Jews. It was familiar to the Greeks as well. It was a problem back in the day, and again, a problem as it is today. All right. So let's move further on 42. Who wants to do 42 for us? Looks like Dan.
How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me remove that splinter in your eye," when you do not even notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite, Remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye.
All right, so what's Christ trying to direct here? What's he trying to direct us to do? Yep, yeah.
I think he's just asking us to constantly, prepare ourselves and make sure that we're in good standing with Christ before we go out and share teachings or advice to others. It's one of those walk the walk, talk the talk type situations. If you're going to tell people to do it, you better have self-examined yourself first before you go and criticize them.
Exactly. He's directing us to the proper way of forming an opinion of others and a proper way of correcting other people. How do we do it? We attend to our own faults first. That's to take the beam out of your eye. All right. We can, by doing that, then we can advance properly, all right, to assisting others with their faults. And then that way, he says, you hypocrite. Can you imagine being called by God, you hypocrite? You hypocrite. Well, that way, there's no hypocrisy in our conduct. If we are checking ourselves first, there can be no hypocrisy. If we don't, you lash out at the person for their faults. Well, they may know yours. And in the back of their mind, they're saying, like, that person has no right to say that to me. Yeah, they have their own problems. No, so what Christ is teaching here is that to get the hypocrisy out of our conduct, to be able to see clearly, all right, what we have to do is we have to examine ourselves. So the prepared way, the proper way then to judge the imperfections of others is to be free from our own issues and problems. And before we can do that, we have to take a hard look at ourselves. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that. But once we do it, then we become qualified, you see, because it makes us candid. It makes us consistent. And it enables us to see things how they truly are. And how are they? Well, it helps us to make proper allowances for weaknesses. All right? Proper allowances for weaknesses. Proper allowances for these imperfections, these little imperfections. And we don't become judgmental. We don't become judgmental. But in order to do it, we have to look at ourselves and realize that might not be the same situation, but we stumble and fall too. That's the key. We stumble and fall too. So we're not free. We're not walking on water 7 days a week. We have our own issues. And so the key is to realize that we are imperfect as well before we lash out and start to pick on the faults of somebody else. That's the teaching. And then we get into the tree talk here. All right. So who wants to read number 43? Frank, how about, oh, Amy? Okay. Amy, go ahead.
Okay. A good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit.
Okay. This seems pretty easy. Is it? What is he saying? Jesus is talking about character here. He's talking about character, right? And he's really giving a proper test to character. He's saying, men don't judge a tree by its leaves or bark or flowers. It judges the tree by the fruit that it bears. So again, the flowers might be beautiful, they might be fragrant, the foliage is thick and green, but they're ornamental. It's the fruit that is of chief service to man, the fruit. And he forms his opinion of the nature and value of the tree by that fruit. Wasn't Sirach saying the same thing a little while ago? So again, let's spin it. So with religion, the vocation or the calling, it might be fair, but the conduct, the fruit, is to determine the nature of the philosophies and the teachings or the ideology. So somebody might have a calling, a specific calling, a specific religious vocation. That's fine. It's the conduct that Jesus is talking about. It's the conduct or the fruit. What comes out of that? That determines the nature of the person's philosophy on specific things, or the teachings, or the ideology. Goes right back to what he's saying about the Pharisees. Oh, on the surface, they look great. They've got all the vestments, they've got whatever, they look fantastic. But what's coming out, the fruit that's coming out is wrong. There's something wrong with it, you see? So a rotten tree, or in this case, a corrupt tree, might have been a tree that had been good, but had become weakened. And so it becomes a tree of useless character. Okay, a tree that's producing nothing beneficial. There's your comparison. You see, a good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit. There's your comparison, you see. So the rotten tree maybe in its day was a good tree, but it became weakened. And because it became weakened, it didn't produce anything beneficial because it struck out on its own game plan. Dan.
So this is really tying into like the faith and works, correct? Am I saying that correctly? Is that the idea? Is that okay? I just wanted to make sure I'm getting what you're saying, but I was thinking about James and what James said in that reading, and I'm trying to, I'm seeing this whole idea that if you have the strong faith, and you do it correctly, you're going to bear those good works, the fruit.
Again, put yourself back into the culture of the time. Okay, the people are seeing the Pharisees who have all the proper vestments, have all the regalia on, okay, and give the appearance of wow. But the fruit's bad. The fruit's bad. Visually, that's the ornamentation, as I said before. The flowers, the leaves are thick and green, the flowers are beautiful, there's a great fragrance. However, the fruit that's coming out, not good. Not good. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because if all of these things are in play, you have the good vocation, you have the good calling or whatever, what should it lead you to do? It should lead you to be doing what the faith wishes to produce, good fruit. So again, if I go back to the Pharisees, I'm picturing the Pharisees from head to toe and all their regalia looking fantastic, looking powerful in front of the people. Wow, these are really, the followers of the law. But the fruit they're producing is terrible. The fruit they're producing is rotten, you see. That's what we're talking about here. So the appearance, I had it back in college, not St. Vincent, prior to that. I had a Benedictine monk. And I never forgot this teaching that he had, or this saying, and he said, clothes don't make the man. And what he was saying was, because he walked around in a habit or had a collar on, that meant nothing. The clothes don't make him. They might identify that he's a priest or he's a monk or whatever, but they don't make him. And I thought that was very, very powerful, that no, just because you've got the collar on or you've got some other thing that you're wearing or whatever, like the Pharisees, that's not it. That's not it. It's the fruit that comes out of that relationship that is the most important. And that's what Christ is saying here. It's the fruit that comes out of that. So let's take a look at 44 and 45. Who wants to read those two? Anyone, just jump in there. Go ahead, Becky.
For every tree is known by its own fruit. For people do not pick figs from thorn bushes, nor do they gather grapes from brambles. A good person out of the store of goodness in his heart produces good, but an evil person out of a store of evil produces evil. For from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Okay. What do we see here? First off, we see a reach back to Sirach right off the bat. Okay, because that's what Sirach is talking about, is what's on the heart is what truly comes out. So what are we seeing here? There's a common thread here. There's a common teaching here, a common theme.
If
Okay,
you're
I'll
a person, if you're a person of good faith, what you do and what people hear you say are going to produce good.
That's exactly right. In other words, external expressions of piety or virtue have no value in themselves. But as Becky is saying, a person of strong faith, that's where the value comes, because what matters and gives meaning is one's inner disposition. So if you are driven by the faith, properly stated, all right, properly rooted in you, okay, well then your external expressions of piety and virtue are going to take root. But if you are not, they have absolutely no value in themselves. So Jesus is talking about what I would call purity of intention. All right. So just as the tree's fruit tells us what kind of tree it is, it's a person's actions then that reveal the heart and where the actions are really coming from. All right. So the disposition of our heart is the true value of our intentions. Doesn't matter that you wear a religious habit, like I said before, or that you wear a collar, or that you wear a mitre. I don't care what it is. Doesn't matter. What matters is that we try to practice virtues. And Saint Teresa of Avila says that we surrender our will to God. That's what matters. That's the point here. Right? That's the point, and a very, very important point. And you can see here where all the three readings for this weekend tie together, because the teachings share that common theme about these external expressions. Right? Those who look good on the surface, but deep down there's rottenness. Deep down there is there's a big lack of truth. Okay. Or a misguided teaching. And so there is no value there, you see. So it's the inner disposition that develops the virtue and develops the good graces, the inner disposition, the being firm in the faith, no matter how difficult it is. And it's challenging today. As Melissa said before, we're constantly debating and protecting our faith. It's constant. And it can be a drain. It can especially be a drain if we do not know or are not firm in the faith ourselves. If we are what I call cafeteria Christians, and you've heard me say it before, you go through the food line, you take off what you like and you put it on your tray. The things that you don't like, you leave back. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem. Any other comments or insights that we want to bring out about these readings today?
I was just going to say, to me, it's kind of like our actions are always based on what's rooted on our heart, and if we have rooted good tree, good old faith, that the fruit's going to be good, the actions are going to be good. But if inside our heart, which nobody can see, eventually our actions and what we say, it's going to come out that what we are saying when the heart's not fully connected to Christ, so it's always goes back to that faith, which then leads to your actions. Like you said earlier in the Bible study, it's going to come out eventually. What's on your heart, it's going to show up in your words or your actions somewhere. So
what does that lead to? What does that take us to when we do that, when there's something else on our heart than should be?
Well, I think it comes down to distractions, but also goes back to teaching faith and knowing the faith and taking care of each other and trying to make sure that we're catechizing each other and reaching out to those that you may think are in need, because it's not enough that we sit back and, we take care of ourselves, obviously, and get ourselves strong in the faith so we can go out, as we've discussed. But it also means you have to go out. You have to go out and help these people and spend time with them and talk to them. And when you see things, you have to offer them hope in Jesus Christ too. It's not enough that we take care of the beam in our own eye. We got to take care of the beam, but then we also have to go help those people with the splinter once we're prepared, so that they can also come to know Christ and also bear fruit to others.
That's the good side. What's the bad side? What's on our heart if we're not functioning in that direction? It's 2 words.
Sin. Mortal sin.
First word begins with an S. 2
First
words.
word.
Self focus.
Self-focus.
Focus. It's the sin of Adam and Eve.
Right.
Self-focus. We turn in on ourselves, and our first priority is us. It's self-focus, you see. And we get so preoccupied with that, preoccupied with making our point, preoccupied with, again, I go back to the Pharisees, keep in mind, the Pharisees were protecting a lifestyle. They knew that if Jesus took hold, the good days were numbered. The good days were numbered. Why? Because Jesus wasn't a man of wealth or money, right? They were living pretty well. You did pretty well to be a priest in the temple or one of the Pharisees. Yeah, you're doing pretty well. They get this guy who comes on the scene, gathering thousands and thousands of people. He starts to continue to gather more and grow. Guess what? The cash flow, the money train, the lifestyle stops, and that becomes the major concern. So they're self-focused. So they're watching every single thing he says and does to see how they can catch him. Because if they can catch him in something, they can get rid of him. You see, so that's it. Those are the roots of that. That's the roots. Those are the roots of the passion and death of Christ, is that they're looking for that because everything he does flies in the face of what they're teaching. You see, so they're self-focused. So they have to teach to what their internal focus is, because by teaching to their internal focus, it satisfies their own needs, but doesn't teach the law as God intended the law to be. And that's what we have to be careful of as well. We have to know the faith. We have to strike out to know every single thing about the faith. And in this day and age, the faith is challenged constantly, just constantly. I kind of wish that we would go back to the days of the blue laws. I don't know if you younger people would know what the blue laws were. The blue laws were quite simple. On Sunday, everything was closed. That was the blue laws, all right? And so you had dinner at home with your family or the whole family. Again, we have a bunch of different cultures here. In my house, an Italian house, 20 or 30 people for dinner was like nothing. Grandma had pasta hanging from every shelf in the house because she made all her own pasta. And when you went into her house on a Saturday, she had white linen towels laid over all the furniture, and her pasta was drying for the next day. And we always had a crowd of people, you see. Stores were closed. The stores were closed. There was no place to go and shop or do whatever. You stayed home. We've lost that. And so in losing that, we've lost the conversation of the family. We've lost the conversation of the faith. How often, I don't expect an answer. I just throw out this rhetorical question. How often are you sitting around talking about what you believe in? I would think not too much. I was talking about the game, how the game was, or who won the Super Bowl, or how much money you've got riding on something. But how often do you really sit and talk about the faith? How do you feel comfortable talking about the faith? There's another question. Do you feel comfortable talking about the faith? And if you don't, well, you need to do a little bit of homework, you see, because that's part of who we are. Part of who we are is, or are we, all of us, okay, we are evangelists, just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We are evangelists. We are to be spreading the good news. So that means we have to know the good news ourselves. And we have to focus on learning, again, how Jesus's teachings apply to us today, because they do. And we see it today. The readings today are perfect because they all deal with whatever your heart is being fertilized with is what's going to come out of your mouth. And that's going to be your character. And so if you have a heart that's not properly nurtured and fertilized and whatnot, a conscience that's not properly formed, what's coming out of your mouth is something that shouldn't really be listened to by too many people. But if your heart is properly formed, right, and your conscience is properly formed, yes, you will be someone that can go out there and spread the word of God. That's the key. And so from Sirach back in the, 160 BC, whenever that was written, 160, 165 BC, somewhere around there. From there, pulling forward, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? The fact that what comes out of your mouth does one of two things. it does tremendous good or it does tremendous evil. So take your choice, right? So if it's going to do tremendous good, you have to feed it with things that cause it to grow in goodness. If you're going to have a heart that spews out things that are bad, well, that means you're probably going to bend toward whatever way the wind blows, and whatever way the wind blows is whatever the world is saying today about the faith. What I found extremely moving, almost to tears, last night on the news, I saw Ukrainian soldiers standing at the back of a dump truck. And in that dump truck, standing up on an easel, was a big icon of the Blessed Mother. And they were praying. Just blew me away. Just the beauty of that. The beauty of that. And you see prayers all over the internet and whatnot. But if you get a chance, Google some of that, you'll see it. You'll see the soldiers in their camo clothes with their guns and whatnot, and they're standing praying, okay, to the Blessed Mother. And then there are other pictures of the people out in the fields. They're all kneeling. They're kneeling and praying. This is really powerful. This is quite a powerful lesson. And this morning, when I got up this morning, I was elated to see that Russia has not taken over the capital city that they held through the night. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. But look into it. This is what needs to be on our hearts. This is what we need to be sharing with people. We need to turn to God. We need to bring God into the center of our lives. And that's what these three readings are saying this weekend.